Welcome back to the Sales Cadence Podcast. This is the show for everyone who understands that being in sales is simply part of life. My name is Matt Sykes. I'm your host. I'm the founder of Sales Cadence, the sales training and coaching company. And if, like me, you're passionate about helping people make truly epic buying decisions so that every deal feels right, rewarding, and natural, good news. You're in the right place. Steve Radford, welcome to the Sales Cadence Podcast, my friend.
Thank you.
Steve, what does the listener need to know about you in sort of 60 seconds that's going to really tee up a great listen for them?
Okay. I've been in sales 25 years nearly, but I used to hate sales. So before I became a salesperson, before I recognized that actually I was already selling, I didn't like the idea of salespeople. I thought this was the 90s. I thought they were becoming increasingly irrelevant. The internet was around and things. And it was only when I started working in a sales role that I recognized that sales is about helping people. And that's what I do. I help to develop mindsets as well as knowledge and skills, and hopefully change a little bit of perception about what sales actually is.
Yeah, love it. Brilliant. And Steve is one of those rare breeds of people that not only understand sales, but has written a book about it. And I really want to make the book the central point of this episode. So on pretty much every occasion, I'm going to drag Steve into the world of talking about the book. When was the first formal, official sales job that you got? What were you doing? What was going on at that time in your life?
I think the first job I had that most people would see as a sales role, I worked for a field sales agency out in the field. It was on a gap between, I'd finished working in the hospitality industry. I was going to go off traveling. I'd got a few months, needed to fill some time. A friend of mine worked for an agency, so I went and did a role there. And it was a soft sales role, so it was supporting, implementing merchandising into stores. You had to kind of sell in the concept that had been agreed at head office. So that was my first.
How old would you have been, Steve?
I was 21, 22.
Okay.
22. Yeah, that age, yeah.
And enjoyed it?
I did, yeah, because I'd come from the world of hospitality. I love talking to people, and that's what I got to do. I got to walk into places, different stores at the time, and talk to people. And so, I loved it.
Sales. My first job was in a shoe shop. I still remember, obviously, the horrendous environment I found myself in, not knowing how to sell and being asked to be a salesperson. But I do remember some stuff that were takeaways from my time back then. And I just wondered whether or not there was anything that happened in your first job there working. Is there anything that you can remember that was either good or bad or something that stuck with you?
I think it's the thing that I wished I'd recognized at the time. I kind of knew it, but didn't kind of recognize that that's what it was. And it's just to focus on helping people. I think that's the key to a good sales conversation. It's one of the things when I got into a role which was more typically what you would understand as sales, it's the thing that I wished I'd have known that would built my confidence. And it's the thing I do now with brand new salespeople. If I'm working with new salespeople, we try and get them out into the field or on the phone as soon as possible. And you often see people nervous about it. And so let's just try and help. If we understand that there are ways we can help this person, let's just explore whether any of those are right. And let's just focus on that.
It's a pretty simple thing at the end of the day, isn't it? That approach. But it's a very difficult thing for people to get their heads around, especially when they start in sales, because they just naturally assume, okay, I've got to learn the techniques and all those kind of tips and tricks. And of course, some of that stuff can be quite helpful. But I think you boil it down quite nicely with what you've just explained there, which is if you just put all that stuff to one side for a second, there's a bunch of stuff that you probably need to understand, of course. But if you put that word sort of help front and center, you might find you get quite far. Okay, so look, let's talk about the book. So what's the book called?
It's called How to Sell, Everything You Need to Think, Know, and Do to Have Greater Sales Conversations.
Great. And when does it go on sale, Steve?
It goes on sale on November 25th.
What stimulated to write a book in the first place?
It's the book I wished I'd had when I first started selling. I learned a lot over 25 years. I've developed some quite sizable training programs, so national apprenticeships and diploma programs. And so but those things aren't accessible to everybody. So what I wanted to do was take everything I wish I knew and condense it down into as slim a volume as possible, so that it's something anybody can pick up, because not everybody has the luxury of being able to access training in their role. So yeah, so that's why I wrote it.
Did you see a gap in the market? Was there a gap in that sort of, that world of sales books? Is there a gap that you felt that your book needed to fill?
Yeah, so I train frontline salespeople. So they're often early career salespeople. They're
Yeah,
reps, to put a title on them,
yeah.
and you find a lot of sales trainers don't focus on that area, and as a result, a lot of books don't focus on that area. They focus on, the higher, the consultative sales that have got higher transactional values, and as a result, a lot of the sales books out there don't necessarily tackle those fundamentals. Um, and so that was the gap in the market. I want something that's accessible for people who've perhaps not even started their first sales role, but also helps people that are maybe in sales and just want to formalize some of the things that they know into kind of models and processes and things and ways of thinking that just kind of help them pull that knowledge and skill they've got together into a bit of a framework.
What are the component pieces that make up the book, Steve?
So I did a load of work on what drives sales performance, and there are traits, the things that you need to understand but can't change in an individual. So these are the things you need to select for at recruitment. So your motives, your personality, aptitudes, that kind of thing. But the things that you can develop that sit on top of that are mindsets, knowledge, and skills, which then drive the behaviors that you need to generate the performance you're looking for. So that's the three parts of the book. It's everything you need to think, know, and do. So it's mindsets, knowledge, and skills.
Of those three, is there one that's slightly more important than the others?
I think if you weren't, they're all important.
Sure.
But I think if you wanted to dip in and just take one thing away, it's the thing I've done in chapter one, which is the win-win mindset. And that comes back to about helping people. Um, it's where I tend to start all of my sales training, regardless of the level of experience of the salespeople in front of me. You can gauge how quickly you can get through that with a team. But again, it's that mindset that underpins everything that sits on top of that in that pyramid. So it's mindsets are really important. I like to think of them as behavioral nudges. So when you're particularly stressed or particularly relaxed, you tend to forget those skills you're trying to focus on. And so it's the mindsets then that nudge your behavior. And so if your fundamental one is that win-win, let's focus on doing something that's not only good for us, but good for the customer, that tends to drive behaviors in the right direction.
Interesting. And so, how in depth in that sort of first section around mindset do you go? Are you pulling the whole world of psychology in there, or are you trying to keep it slightly more for the layman or the general person that's designed to read the book?
So I want it to be really easy to access. So I want, regardless of you're in a sales role or not, you should understand this book. In fact, my test for that was to get my 13-year-old daughter to read it.
Okay.
Um, so that was the level of, if she can get through it, I thought, okay, it's accessible, which is what I wanted. Um, so, but I always have this belief that you don't just tell people what to do; you explain why it works.
Yeah.
Because our goal isn't to create sales robots. We want people. We want them to bring some of their personality to it. We want to create skills that are adaptable. And so I do bring in a little bit of things like the neuroscience to explain this is something that works. This is why it works. So if you are going to adapt it, don't break that fundamental principle. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's it's accessible, but there is things like there's a bit of psychology, neuroscience in there too.
Let's use the example that you gave earlier, Steve, with sort of frontline salesperson, recently joined the sales industry, picks up the book, gets through the book, really enjoys the book. If they went back to that first section around mindset, is there one thing specifically you would really love them to sort of take away and really embed?
I've got a definition for what sales is, which I've crafted and refined over a long period of time. Early versions broke when you stress test them in certain ways,
Okay.
and I think so that it's that selling is the process of helping someone to make an informed buying decision by exploring and targeting a win-win outcome. So I think that one sentence encapsulates so much that you can then sort of pull apart. So exploring and targeting, for example, you're not there to just target something, you're there to explore it. So that's the understanding or discovery step of the
Yeah.
conversation. there's lots in there. So I think if you were to go back to it and pull something apart, it's that definition.
Forgive me, I'm going to go slightly off. Sort of nature and nurture, where do you sit on that? Are people born this way, or is it something that they pick up and they learn? Which of those two do
Um,
you favour?
oh, I don't think salespeople are born
No.
at all. There are traits that whether they are nature or nurture, by the time anybody's thinking about sales career, these are set in stone. So you can't change someone's personality, you can't change their motives, neither can they. These things might change slowly over time, but they're outside, they're outside of their control. So you need to kind of recognize that there are elements that you can't control, but getting a deeper understanding of them helps you to be a more effective salesperson.
Yeah, such a key point. So, again, on that theme of things that are outside of their control, what happens if? Give me some advice if a salesperson doesn't understand that. What do you tend to see? What does a sales leader tend to see if someone in their team who just had no real concept of the importance of mindset and really don't understand that there are certain things that are outside of their control? What's going wrong then? What is that sales leader seeing in that salesperson?
I think in the context of the sales conversation, you get salespeople who fail to adapt to the customer in front of them. They have one way of communicating, one way of selling, and they tend to just stick in that lane.
Yeah.
And if you think in terms of, there's lots of different ways you can look at personality, but you often get the 4-box models, a lot of these things. So if you think of 4 basic personality types, well, if you are not adapting to the customer in front of you, 75% of the time, you're not communicating in a way that's optimal for that prospect or customer.
Yeah, it's a great point. I always like to go back to basics as well around the whole kind of psychological side of things. We both know, don't we, that it's a classic phrase, been around forever. I don't know who came up with it first. People buy emotionally and justify intellectually afterwards. And I think I don't know if you see the same, Steve, when you're working with your clients, but I do observe quite a lot that most salespeople either do it the wrong way round, or they do it the wrong way around and only do half of it, which is they forget the emotional purchase or the emotional drivers
Yes.
that buyers have. And so they're straight into the intellectual sale, that kind of transactional approach, which I know you talk about a lot in the book. And so they're coming at it from the wrong end. And quite often this is why, some deals do die, because you just can't create that level of understanding around the buyer's emotional drivers.
Yes.
And I think that's probably why that whole subject around mindset is so important for people to understand. Because if I can join a conversation with a buyer where we're talking about what they want, what they need to get out of it, and the benefits that come with that, then I think we're off in the right direction, rather than coming at it from the other end, which is, okay, you want to buy one of these, well, let me show you how that works. Here's the lever, you pull that, you press that button, and this pops up.
Folks, just give me 45 seconds, would you? How would you like to run your own sales training and coaching business with the tools, the structure, and a recognized brand behind you? Back in 2014, I walked away from a European sales director role to try my hand at self-employment. Now, I got plenty of things wrong, but lots gloriously right. And those scars and those wins have become the foundations of today's Sales Cadence brand. The Sales Cadence license gives you everything I wish I'd had from day one. It's built for sales leaders who want the freedom of being their own boss, but don't want to spend years reinventing the wheel. Think of it as a business in a box without the guesswork. If you're ready to make the jump from corporate world to self-employment and you want the right partner beside you, get in touch and I'll send you a copy of the prospectus.
We'll come back to the book in a second. I want to talk about the wonderful world of LinkedIn. And so you've been on there for a while, I guess?
I have, yes. I kind of live on LinkedIn, it feels like, at the moment.
What does that mean, live on LinkedIn? I'm just
Oh,
curious.
okay. You can have conversations with people in lots of different ways, right?
Yeah.
People like to have conversation with or buy from people they know, like, and trust. And LinkedIn is one way of of warming people up. So they feel like they know you. Hopefully they like you. Maybe you start to build a little bit of trust, which means when you try and open a conversation, it makes that a little bit easier. And I find LinkedIn is a great platform to do that on.
I don't know if you noticed, but every sort of 12 months, something will come through the world of LinkedIn, which is the next greatest thing ever. And it's always a really important. So, for example, curiosity is a word I just sort of struggle with at the moment, not because it's a really fundamental important thing for salespeople to master. Of course it is. The same thing with empathy as well. Empathy is massive, of course, but we can sometimes be empathized to death, can't we, with the posts that we see? Curiosity, I struggle with at the moment. What's your take on that important skill? Because I think we both agree that curiosity is clearly an important trait of a good salesperson.
Yes.
What's your take on curiosity? Why is that such an important skill for salespeople?
So it actually comes into the book twice, once in the mindsets chapter, once in the skills part of the book. So in the mindsets part of the book, there are 6 mindsets, one of which is the growth mindset. And this is a bit, the belief that you can always be better. And that's curiosity. It's not shutting down to ideas that might appear a bit alien or new or different. It's about being curious about how is it I could improve. We all know about marginal gains. So it comes in there. I think curiosity is incredibly important, especially with the pace of change in the world now. If you're not open to new ideas, you're going to become out of date very, very quickly. So it comes in there, but also in the sales conversation. I have a 7-step sales structure. Step 3 is understand. I don't call it discovery. I call it understanding, because that for me is that little bit deeper. It's not, don't just be curious about what, be curious about why. Let's understand, okay, where's that come from? That's, dig into why that's interesting. And in some cases, if you've got a customer that's particularly interested about something that you don't think is actually relevant, but they think it's important, be naturally, allow that natural curiosity to come through. And the conversation might go on a bit of a tangent, but that's part, we talked about rapport building earlier. That's part of, the ongoing rapport building. So curiosity is fundamentally important in a number of ways, for sales.
I guess where I'm getting it slightly, I wouldn't say meshed, but because of the advance of AI, and because you and I'm sure would agree that the best salespeople are the ones that are prepared.
Yes.
And so you're never going to go to a call unless you've done some kind of background work, some due diligence. Actually, it's for me now, it's almost like a sackable offence if you rock up to a sales meeting for the first time and you haven't leveraged the value that AI can bring to help you help the other person. If you haven't done that, then you really don't deserve to be in sales. It comes back to your very great point there about being curious to know how I can be better. And so if someone's listening to this right now and they're not invested in, making sure they do as much as they can to learn as much about the prospect before they go and see them, then take that as a point from myself and Steve, that's probably a great place to start investing some of your time. Be curious about what you could learn about that. But I guess where I get meshed a little bit is, could there be a case that curiosity, as important as it is not quite as important as actually going armed with some kind of insight, some sort of evidence, because you've already done the due diligence.
Yes.
You already know that the person you're in front of is probably a fit. I know we won't know that for sure, certainly on a first-time discovery call, but we wouldn't necessarily be wasting our time with people if we didn't think that the person we're going to have a conversation with, we've got something in common, which we might loosely put brackets around that and call that a sales opportunity. So I don't know what your thoughts are around that shift. Maybe they're two sides of the same coin, perhaps, but it's just that difference between being curious and actually turning up with insight and some sort of evidence.
And I think that's really important. I mean, to come back to your first point about planning and preparation, if you walk in to see a prospect and you're asking questions about things to try and discover information which is easily discoverable, then you don't deserve to be in that conversation.
Agreed.
Yes, you might dig into something because you want to get more depth on something you found out. You might want to come back to a subject and maybe ask why rather than just what.
Yes.
But that's that's hugely, hugely important. But you're right that you also need to go in there with insight. So if we go back to what I do, if I'm ever supporting a brand new salesperson out on the road, like I say, we try and get them. I work with a lot of field salespeople, try and get them out into the field as quickly as possible. We stop out of sight of where we might be seen by a customer, and I ask them, why are we here? Why is it we're going to walk in that door? And if they can't give me an answer, it's like, well, we're not going to walk in that door until we've got an answer to that. And then I want 3 things. So we're going to set 3 objectives that we're going to explore with this customer. I want 3 different ways that we might be able to help this customer. And that's that insight piece. It's okay, we've done some research. What can we see about this customer? What we research, what can we see in the CRM? Okay. Of all the ways that we can help this customer, what are the ones that we think are probably going to be the case so we can explore in that way? and ideally, some of which will be things that the customers that are brand new to them, that are going to delight the customer in a way because they've never recognized, oh, this is not a way I recognize that you could potentially help me.
You're actually forcing them to go and do that work in advance to make
Yes.
the experience for the prospect even better, right?
Yeah. And it should be a hard and fast rule. If you can't answer that question, don't walk in the door.
Yeah, absolutely right. Just go back to that point I mentioned earlier at the top of the podcast about working in the shoe shop. So it still rings in my ears. And my boss at the time taught me these three things. He said everyone knows what they know, and then the second thing is everybody knows what they don't know. And if we put ourselves in the position of buyers or prospects, the exact same is true because they have as much access to information as we do. I don't know about your past history in sales, Steve, but mine was spent with a lot of very, very credible senior procurement specialists because I used to sell in the packaging industry, and most of those buyers, Steve, had more sales training than I'd ever had, let
Yes.
alone the fact they had to be qualified in the world of procurement. And so insanity to assume that they haven't done some form of due diligence before we walk in the room too, right? So they
Yes.
know some stuff. The reason why we're being invited in, or the reason why we've got the opportunity to have the conversation, is because there are some things that they know they don't know. And we can sometimes call that the problem. But I guess even today, most buyers, and let's include you and I, Steve, as buyers, we will go out of our way to try and self-solve, won't we? We'll think, well, this has just happened. How do I fix it? I'll YouTube, Google, AI, ask someone around the corner, and I'll try and work out what I believe to be the solution to the problem. Because I know I don't know the answer, but I'll try and find it out. But the third part of the everybody knows what they know, everybody knows what they don't know. The third part is nobody knows what they don't know. And that's the bit that you're touching on there, which is can your salesperson walk in to a call, having done their due diligence, and bring an insight? So moving away from the world of curiosity slightly, but bringing an insight that says, I've got some new information for you. Let me share it with you. And if that new information is something they didn't even know existed, I think that's a really great place to start a buyer-seller relationship, because at that point, you're bringing some new information that adds value.
Yeah, I agree. And
Got off on a tangent there, shouldn't really. I want to talk about you and your book. So let's go back to the book, because you just teased me a little while ago because you talked about your 7-step framework. I assume that's in the book, right?
it is, yeah. Part 3 of the book is.
Are you happy just to walk us through those steps?
Yeah, sure. So it's a conversational framework. So you can use it to sell products and services, but it's just as effective at selling an idea. So the first step is plan and prepare. Right, that's where all great sales conversations start. Step 2 is your first customer engagement step, which is engage. So step 2 is to engage and open a conversation. Step 3 is then understanding. We spoke about that a moment ago. Make sure you understand, or you build on the understanding that you already have about that customer situation before you move to step 4, which is to propose what the customer should do next, and then present your justification of why you think that's the best next action. So that's steps 1 to 4. Step 5 is the trial close. So this is a pivot point. It's where you gauge where the customer is in their buying decision journey. So it's a question that's simple, like, how does that sound? I've just proposed where I think you should go next and presented my justification for that. I'm now going to ask you, how does that sound? And the customer's going to tell you where to go next. They might give you a really strong buying signal, in which case you move to step 6, which is close. But there are 2 steps which sit off the main pathway. They might, when you ask them that trial close question, tell you something that they're not sure about or not happy about in what it is that you've recommended. And that's where you can move into handling and overcoming objections. And then you might pivot from that. Handling and overcoming objections is about standing your ground. So the other side shoot off there is negotiate, which is about compromise. All of those lead to close. And then step 7 is follow up, which is about closing the loop. It's not just about following up on that individual conversation. It's what have I learned from that can help me to plan and prepare more effectively for the next conversation with that customer or with a customer who's similar.
Let's just go back to step 5, if we can, which is the trial close, because I think that's an area that most, certainly in my experience when I observe people, most people don't. I don't know what you think. Do you see the same?
Yes. And it's a really simple technique that helps in so many different ways. And you can adapt it. It needs to be an open question, because what you don't want at this point is a yes or a no. That's what the close step is for. But yeah,
Sure.
it's a simple but highly effective step.
is probably one of the most important things. And it's, in my experience, as I mentioned, the thing I see most people neglect. They're very good at going through the whole kind of getting to a point where actually there is some symbiosis here, but they forget to ask the question, which is, well, is there?
Yeah.
Or am I just thinking that it sounds good because you keep nodding in all the right places, Mr. Buyer? So it's such an important point. And then, sorry, the last part was, did you say negotiate? Or follow up was the last part, wasn't it?
Follow up, yeah. So and then, like I say, this is there's a diagram of the 7-step sale in the book, but essentially think of it as a cyclical process.
Yeah.
So the follow up step links back into planning and preparation.
Let's just dip back into the world of the world of Steve. What I'm really curious to learn is what happened where you moved full time into training people for a living.
Okay, so after I worked in the field and worked for a field sales agency, 3 of us left and set up our own agency. So I spent 10 years managing sales teams on behalf of brands. My role then was the operational side of the business. We didn't do a huge amount of learning and development in that role, but it was something that I got increasingly interested in as the sophistication of the teams we were managing grew. To the point where what I found I loved it's that penny drop moment. It's that moment that I described earlier, which is when I fell in love with sales, is because I found it was about helping people. And I found that that's the bit I really enjoyed. So when I sold that agency into a larger group, I actually went back to university for a while, and I looked at how to drive effective workplace learning.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was my kind of foray into kind of full-time L&D. So that was about 15 years ago.
If I look back 10 years ago, Steve, there were some things I used to teach then that I don't teach anymore. I'll touch on one in a minute. Is that the same for you? If you look back in your own sales journey, are there some things? Is there one thing that comes to mind where you sort of almost not necessarily wince now, but you don't teach anymore?
Oh, there's loads, and some of it is how you teach as well as what you teach. So I'll give you an example of both. So in terms of what I teach, neuroscience has moved on. So there are ways of thinking about the way brains works, which are just no longer deemed to be true. So that's part of that growth mindset. You've got to keep on top of things like that. But I think I used to overcomplicate things. I've worked a lot at simplifying things as much as possible. And a lot of the techniques I used to train were just far too complicated to remember in the moment. You could potentially do them in a training environment, but take objection handling, for an example. That's quite an emotionally charged step of the sales process, or it can feel that way. So the last thing you need at that point is to have 3 or 4 different frameworks you might use depending on the nature of the objection. So things like that have disappeared. I've really worked on what is it that we can do to have as simple a process and technique as possible that works across all situations.
How have you reached that place where you've gone, actually, we don't do that anymore?
There's lots of ways. Sometimes you can be standing there with a room delivering something that you know in your mind makes complete sense, and you can just tell you've lost the room. It's like, okay, let's not do that again. There are other times where you've got a technique and you've got a salesperson that's got it, but then when you actually go out and observe them, it just doesn't land in reality for them. There are other reasons where technology's moved on, so the ways of doing things. There's lots and lots of reasons, and that's one of the thing I'm most passionate about is learning. On a personal level, I haven't got one hobby. I've had loads because I love learning new things, and that's what I like about this role. You're always finding ways to improve things.
I think you've landed on the reason. I mean, certainly that word learning is important in the point I'm talking about now, which is, if I go back and think about some of the howlers that I used to deliver, it wasn't done intentionally, of course. How could it be? It was just that things have changed, and the way that you find out about things changing is you learn.
Yeah.
You do listen to podcasts, you do read books, you write books, and you go and get yourself trained, and it's that process of self-improvement and learning really that brings to your attention, actually, that thing that I teach probably doesn't make sense anymore, or is not right for today. So we'll just back that out and not do that again. I was in the car the other day and I was listening to a podcast, and I don't know if you've heard of Todd Caponi.
Yes.
I think he wrote a book called The Transparency Cell, and he was talking about something that was really touched the nerve, because I can remember, even only maybe I'm going to say 2 years ago, perhaps, I was still teaching this as a technique, not within the sales environment. This is more within sort of marketing, really, or sort of pre-sales, about the importance of case studies. Just very briefly, I went back in. I came out of self-employment during COVID and went back to work for an organisation, and we were selling a service. And on occasions, we would get asked for a discount. Look, you're more expensive than the guys down the road. We do like you. We'd like to work with you, but you just need to do something on price. And I used to trade a discount for a case study.
Yep.
And I used to think that's a brilliant idea. I used to teach all the salespeople that work with me to do the same, and we used to do quite a bit. It was a great way of, classic negotiation. If you, then I. And then I'm listening to Todd Capone the other day in the car, and he said that's a really bad idea. And when I listened, he made such sense, because actually the case study is not something you buy; it's something you earn.
Yes.
And a penny dropped when he said that, and he said it, and sort of lesson to me, really, but to anyone who's listening who does do the case study thing, the only way to get a case study is to go back to the person 60 days after you've sold them something and say, did it work? Did you get what we promised you? Did you get the outcome you came to see me about? And if you did, that's great. Would you mind getting involved with some kind of literature that helps promote that? So I don't do the case study for a discount anymore.
I was talking to Andy Bounds the other day,
yeah.
and it's something great when someone says, "Can you do anything on the price?" He says, "Yeah, I can put it up."
Yeah. No, the other one he says, which is brilliant, is, "Oh yeah, let me just find out if the B team are free next week. Then, the B
Yes.
team. Well, if you can't afford the A team, then I'll get you the B team. They're a lot cheaper." Remind me again. Mindset was the first part. What are the two other frameworks within the book, How to Sell?
So part 1 is mindsets. So
Yep.
6 essential mindsets. Part 2 is knowledge. 5 essential areas of knowledge. Part 3 is skills. 7
Right.
steps.
Well, we've done the skills, which is the 7 steps, right?
Yes.
So we flesh out for the listener. What's the knowledge part?
So 5 key areas of knowledge, and a lot of the time it's when you're helping salespeople to develop their knowledge. I'm not an expert in their product or service, so that's not what I'm teaching them. I'm teaching them about how to organize what they know, how to fill the gaps, how to make that knowledge useful. So the first one we look at is what you're selling. And we get people to think about really what you're selling is an idea, regardless of what it is that you're selling. So we start to think of it that way. When we talk about second part of knowledge that we have to build is who to target. So ideal customer profiles, and thinking about competitors. Competitors are also targeting these people. How do you target a competitor in the right way? Third level is your goals, objectives, targets, and KPIs. Deep understanding of what they are, how they fit together, how they help your organization, your team, so that you feel part of a whole. Really important for salespeople who are perhaps based in the field. It helps them to feel connected to the wider organization. Also helps them to talk about what they do with senior members of their leadership team in a slightly different way. We talk about their role in the sales pipeline. So again, this is helping them to learn about what a sales pipeline actually is from a conceptual perspective. If they are whole of pipeline, what does that actually mean, and what are their objectives in different parts of the pipeline? And then the fifth area is sales strategies and plans. So understanding at the right level for the salesperson, what is their organization's sales strategy, and how do they make plans to advance that strategy? And that's their element. And that then moves into 7-step sale, into the plan and prepare chapter of the first step of that.
Very good. I listened to you with on the lovely Fred Cope States podcast recently. Yeah. He put a post out on LinkedIn, and his post was about, should sales trainers offer a guarantee? What's your take on that?
It depends on what you mean by guarantee, because we can't guarantee a sales performance improvement, because at the end of the day, there are competitors out there, the customer landscape shifts. So it's difficult to give a guarantee in the areas that organizations are looking for. What I tend to do is I give a satisfaction guarantee. Said, I guarantee the quality of what I deliver, and I don't go out and deliver things that are essentially off the shelf. There's always an element of contextualization. And if I don't think you're going to be satisfied with what I deliver, then I won't do it. If I've got that wrong, that's fair enough. Then in which case, that's where I would guarantee things. Yeah.
Yeah, but you wouldn't get it wrong, because you do all the things I know you do, which is the proper due diligence beforehand, right? I guess I do like to get behind a guarantee, because I do believe the responsibility for people like you and I is to guarantee transfer of knowledge.
Yes.
And that's really what we do, don't we? People come into our classrooms, And when they leave, we've guaranteed that we've transferred knowledge from us to them. What we can't guarantee is what they do with it next. But that's really why I think the responsibility shifts to the business that's invited you in to be the trainer of their people, right? I bang on about this too much, and I've lost a fair amount of revenue as a consequence of this because, like you, by the sounds of things, I won't train anyone who can't guarantee they're going to do something with the training after I've finished. Now, I need to get over myself because I could probably be, my bank balance would look a lot better. But like you, I'm very passionate about the subject matter, and I don't see any point why people would, unless their only objective, Steve, and it could well be, and there's nothing wrong with this, is let's get everybody in a room for a couple of days and give them a good time. Because there are some benefits that come off that in terms of team building and culture and morale, and just give everybody that arm around them that says, look, we care about you, we like investing in you, and and I think there's a lot of merit in that. But I do get somewhat frustrated if organizations ask for training and then they haven't thought what happens next. And that's really where I start to focus more around the guarantee. Because if we get together and you can guarantee that you're going to put in some coaching afterwards, or if not, bring me in or somebody I know, then you can take that investment somewhere pretty stunning and get a real return on it, right?
Yeah, because the mistake some people make is they think about training as a one-off event, and that's not how you build embedded behaviors. And that's essentially what we need to do if we're going to drive long-term performance improvement. And so you're right, it's what's going to happen afterwards. And yes, all the training I deliver, people develop their own personal action plans, but who's going to then support them in delivering those and make sure they come to life? And so that's where, in some cases, I will then do some coaching follow-ups with the managers. So yes, it's the manager's role to continue to support the salespeople, but I will then coach the managers. And what we do is we focus on action plans, etc. But yeah, you're right. It's all training is forgettable unless you reinforce it enough times. Yeah,
it's and if anyone's listening to this, sales leader, and you have the ability to invest in your sales team. What Steve is saying there, and I agree with, is you need to be having conversations with people who are asking you the question, what are you going to do with it then? And if you're having a conversation with a sales training provider who just says, we can do that, when can we book you in? I would be very careful. That's a bit of a red flag for me. So make sure you hang around people like Steve or me, who are going to say to you, look, happy to chime in and love to do that, of course, but we do need to sit down and have a proper, thorough conversation to understand what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? What's going to change when we've done it? And how are you going to make sure that happens?
A sales trainer that takes some time to understand their customers, right?
There you go. Who would have thought? A sales trainer that sells. And that's why it almost makes me feel like we should be having a conversation about those that can't sell, teach, but we don't need to do that. I think we've just done it for us. Okay, listen, a couple of other questions. So I want to get back to the book. So imagine the scenario, Steve. The book's been bought by a sales team, 12 people in the sales team. The sales leader's given everyone a copy, signed, I'm sure. And and 30 days later, he gets everybody in the room for a debrief. Okay, we've read Steve's book, How to Sell. And the sales leader says to the sales team, right, what's one uncomfortable truth that you've learned from that book? What do you think would be one of the things that someone in that team would say would be an uncomfortable truth they found when they read the book?
Okay. Well, the first uncomfortable truth, if you've got a room full of salespeople and you've given them a book, is that most of them are going to go, I didn't read it. I think what can also happen, we talked about confidence a little bit earlier, and often, and you don't know what you don't know sometimes, and often the most confident people are the people who know a really small amount. And the uncomfortable truth could be, in some cases, is, oh my God, there's so much more to this than I'd thought. And it's why when I developed the first draft of the book, it went out to 10 different people from sales leaders, but to 2 of the people were early career salespeople. Both of them only been in the role for a small number of months. And a bit of the feedback I got was, it's just overwhelming. So I deliberately position it as a handbook. I've made it easy to dip in and out of. So I think the uncomfortable truth is there's too much to do here and all in one go. You need to pick one place, start there. And that's the growth mindset. It's the marginal gain principle. So yeah, I've deliberately packed it full of everything that I, wished I knew, as I said earlier. As a result, you're going to have to cherry pick and start with small bits and keep coming back to the book and building.
Yeah. Okay. Look, let's sort of wrap things up as we sort of reach towards the top of the hour. I just want to just touch back into that sort of transition from selling to training, and obviously it's not because you, unless you've got a team of people working for you, I guess you sell everything that you deliver, right? Is that how it works in your
Yeah,
world?
I do. I do have some people that I work with, but
Okay.
yeah, what I don't want to do is never be in front of people training. I love doing that. So I deliver a lot of the training myself.
Look, you love training people, right?
Yep.
And I suspect that when you're in front of a room full of people and you're sort of an hour in, I always enjoy that point where someone once, I can't remember again who it was, but someone once said to me there are three T's in a sales training room. There's the terrorists, the guys that are there with their arms folded, who've been in
Yep.
sales for 16 years. They only went on one TAC training course 16 years ago, a bit like I did, but they know everything. So I don't know why I'm here. This is an insult. So you've got
Yep.
your terrorists, and you have to do a bit of hostage negotiation. You've got your tourists who are just passing through, having a great day out. They might clear their email inbox. They might smile at the right times, but they'll probably leave with nothing. And then you've got your trailblazers. They are the ones why I want to be in a training room. And there might only be two or three of them in a room full of 12, but they're the ones that are leaning in, that are asking questions, sometimes challenging. But you know that actually this person's got something, they're going to go and do something with this. Is that your same experience? And the second question really is, what is it about training that you find so engaging and almost addictive?
So yes, it's definitely my experience, and I'll give you an example. So I said I went back to university. I studied work-based learning. The university I worked with was Derby University. They had a corporate arm, and they'd got some funding at the time. So we actually developed a program for salespeople. Um, it was government funded as long as the people finished the program. So people were put on this program by their employers because of some free training. So we definitely had those arms folded at the front of the room. And a guy I worked with at the time, Richard John, taught me a brilliant thing. It's like, if you're sitting here and thinking you already know this, brilliant, then we're going to give you a qualification for something you can already do. People are like, oh, okay. So there's an element of that. Um, and that's, I think, one of the things I love is that with training, you've got a room full of different people. If you've got it right first, if you can understand a little bit about the different characters you might have in the room, because you've got, the trailblazers who sometimes you want to quieten down a little bit so that other people get a chance to speak. But you've got those terrorists who actually you want to draw on their experience. Dave, I know this is something you're brilliant at. Give me an example of how you do this, and you pull them in to be part of the delivery. Because it's about giving everybody value that they've taken away. And with those terrorists, sometimes it's giving them an opportunity to have their say in the room.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that. And usually you're absolutely right. And usually they come with you then, or they realise pretty quickly that actually they don't have all the answers, and so they
mm.
either quieten down, or they just sort of comply and go with it, and ultimately end up being, in some cases, can almost be a trailblazer. But yeah, okay, brilliant. Final question before I go there. Remind everybody about the book. Where can they get it, and when's it on sale?
Okay, so the book is called How to Sell Everything You Need to Think, Know, and Do to Have Greater Sales Conversations. It's on sale from November 25th. You can get it on Amazon, the paperback, hardback, audiobook, ebook. And if you're listening to this before it launches, I know we've got an Amazon-backed Kindle deal on launch day. So yeah, you can grab it. You'll be able to grab it for a great price on launch.
Mega. And having done a little bit of due diligence before we came on, there are one or two ways in which people can get extra content. Is that right?
So prior to the book launch, so if you're listening to this in the few days before it goes live, if you go to greatersales.com/how to sell, stick your email address in there. I'll give you some extras before the book sells, but there is a link in the book to where there is a suite of free online extras. So there's some AI tools, there's some videos, there's some downloadable templates and things which go along with the book too. So yeah, there's lots of extras, not just what's in print.
Brilliant, Steve. Well done. You should do this selling for a living, mate. Last question, and it wouldn't be a sales podcast without asking a question about AI, would it? What part of what you do and what we do, what the sales training and coaching industry does, what part of that won't AI ever be able to replace?
It's that human to human interaction. There are things that AI is brilliant at, but empathy is not one of them. Connection, emotion, isn't, these are things that people crave. And I think actually, as AI becomes a bigger part of what we all do on a day-to-day basis, customers will seek out those interactions and they'll value the sales conversations in a different way, as long as those are good quality sales conversations and you haven't got a salesperson who could effectively be replaced by a bot.
Really good. Steve, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really grateful that you reached out, and I'm glad we could get you on, and encourage everybody. I don't know if we've sold the book to you over the last 55 minutes, but I'm encouraging everybody to go and do exactly what Steve has suggested and go and grab a copy of that book. Well done for writing it, sir. I know how difficult it is to write a book, and so I wish you every success with it. I'm sure it'll be a real winner.
Thank you, Matt.
Steve, thanks ever so much for joining the podcast.
Pleasure.